Welcome to First Chapter Indie Reads. I'm Leslie, and every week I read the opening of an indie novel so you can find your next favorite author. This week I'm reading Heartmaster, an epic fantasy by Nicholas Everhart. Chapter 1. Prove Your Worth. A disheveled bard finished his latest ribald tune, and Draven roared with laughter, slamming his goblet on the table harder than intended. Burgundy liquid sloshed over the rim, coating his hands in sticky alcohol. He licked it off like a cat cleaning its paws. A dark-haired mech-twin beauty curled around his chest like a second skin favored Draven with a winsome smile. He winked at her, knowing full well she cared only for his coin. A worthy trade. The mech-twin's fingers stole downward, seeking the purse at his belt. He pulled her hand away and pressed it to his lips. It was rare for any mech-twin to be free, but he admired the fierce pride she carried herself with in spite of her race's notorious reputation. Once their empire, commanded by the Mad King, had stretched the length of the continent. Only the combined forces of all the gods could topple him. Or so the story went. "I'm not that drunk, my sweet. Give it an hour." He smiled while she pouted. She traced a fingertip down his neck to his chest, content to bide her time. Draven emptied his wine cup and called for another. "A toast to Draven, the greatest thief to prowl the proud city of Sharazin." He raised his cup, praising himself for his latest haul, a stolen wine shipment that netted him enough to pay his dues to the Thieves' Guild for a season. "They can wait. I've better uses for the money, like the beautiful lady at my side." She laughed, but not everyone found mirth in his jest. A knife flew in his direction. Draven plucked it from the air and drove it onto the top of his table. The woman at his side scurried away at the prospect of violence. Identical scenes played out around the rundown tavern. Fools like him were ever ready to gamble away their coin for moments of raucous abandon. She'll be back." He tapped a finger to his chin, wondering whom he might have insulted this time. Draven turned his head, looking for the owner of the jewel-encrusted knife wobbling on his table. It didn't take long to find his mark. Katay." Draven rolled his eyes. He placed a finger on the quivering knife to stop its movement. He considered plucking it from the table and returning it to its sender, in kind. "Lying, moon-faced jackal." A swarthy face appeared from behind the rabble, which quieted, eager for a bit of bloodshed. "I prefer Draven the Deft." Draven attempted a smirk, but his heart wasn't in it. The man at the end of the room had stolen the joy he'd reveled in only moments ago. No one calls you that. Draven the Daft, mayhap." Katay strode through the crowd, short of stature, but broad of shoulder. Dark eyes peered at Draven from a visage marred by scars and a patchy beard. "Really? He gets a name like Katay the Cat's Eye, and I'm stuck with Daft?" Draven wiggled the dagger out of the table, flipping it in the air. The polished blade threw glints of light across the room. "I'm sure you'd like to have this fine blade returned." An evil gleam communicated Draven's intent. Katay laughed. "Keep it. Not as if you could ever steal such a blade on your own." The tavern laughed with him. Draven frowned, and an angry twitch of his wrist sent the jeweled knife into the floor between them. "It's not worth enough to spark my interest, cat's belly." Katay rose to Draven's taunt, launching himself at the younger man with a bellow of rage. Knives slid from well-oiled sheaths, and the pair met in a clash of metal on metal. Steel snaked out, glinting in the guttering lanterns of the dingy tavern. Draven spun and ducked under a slash, his blade coming up under Katay's guard to score the front of the man's tunic. Then Draven rolled back, laughing as he went, and came up resting on the balls of his feet, ready to strike again. Katay bellowed another insult, but did not charge again. He dabbed at a spot of blood on his ruined tunic. "First blood, that's the rule." Draven held up his dagger, wiping away a faint trace of scarlet. Katay grumbled something unintelligible, but shoved his knives back into their sheaths. "You're fast, I'll give you that, but that doesn't mean you've earned your rank." Their audience reacted with nods, and Draven scowled, as if they knew what made a master. "Have I not defrauded merchants from one end of the city to the other? Have I not taken jewels from ladies' ears without arousing their suspicions? Draven leered at Kate, chewing on his words. Have I not picked nearly every pocket that had so much as a silver piece in the whole of Sharazin? He executed a perfect bow, never taking his eye off his enemy. Lies and chicanery. You're a master of common thefts, but common is all you'll ever be. Kate spat on the floor at Draven's feet. I dare you to name one item of note you've stolen. Margot the Bold once stole a priest-king's jeweled slippers from his feet with the man none the wiser. That dagger I lobbed at you hung from the girdle of a wizard who didn't know it was gone till I was half a day's ride away. Kate crossed his arms over his chest, looking down his nose at his rival. They will forget your name the moment you exit this den of ilk. What will be your legacy? Spilt wine and loose coins. Draven puffed out his chest and pointed a finger at Kate, only to realize he might have a point. True, he had amassed a tidy hoard, but he preferred easy marks and guaranteed profits. I don't care for risk. Risk leaves someone dead and me running in shame. Your silence speaks volumes. Kate sniffed and dabbed at the scratch Draven inflicted on his torso. Who needs some priceless bauble he'd never be able to fence? Draven folded his arms across his chest, wilting as every eye now turned to him. Even his evening's entertainment joined them in silent judgment. You'd think my coin would buy loyalty. A fresh voice called out from the throng, one that he recognized, and that cut him to the core. People who claim to be master thieves, who would hold themselves above common footpads and rogues. Draven's head turned so fast he feared his neck might snap. This new critique came not from the quarrelsome Kate, but from his own mentor, Larash, who had taken him in when Draven's world had collapsed a few years ago. That loss still ate at Draven, still framed his days with guilt, and this fresh reminder nibbled at his bravado. He shook his head free of cobwebs and turned to face Larash, but kept one eye on Kate. You too, Larash? I thought at least you might have my back. You've done passably well since I helped you out of that spot, but it's time you either learned your place or made your mark. You want to boast you're a master? Then you need to steal something of note and register it with the guild. Larash put a hand to Draven's shoulder in a fatherly gesture, but the glint of steel in the man's eyes betrayed his true motivation. There was no love there, only a serpent looking for an angle. Draven shrugged his hand off. So you can claim that all I know came from you? Well, it didn't. You may have taught me some tricks, but much I already knew before you apprenticed me, you old sot. Draven gritted his teeth, willing himself not to ball up his fists as anger boiled his blood. Larash's hand strayed to the dagger at his waist as Draven's words hit home. Draven sneered and laughed. Try it, old man, and I'll gut you where you stand. No first blood, no second chances. Draven froze the older thief with an icy glare. Larash looked at him with a mixed expression, calculating the odds before letting the dagger fall back into the sheath and crossing his arms. Are you going to let this upstart rail on like this? Kate bounced, eager to restart their squabble. Larash held up a hand to Kate, motioning him to silence, and then clucked his tongue, eyeing Draven up and down. You've missed your calling, boy. Mayhap you're more assassin than thief. You've got quick hands. Not deft, but certainly quick. The insult cut Draven to his core, but he wouldn't give Larash the satisfaction of knowing how deeply. He shifted his gaze left and right, noting every eye in the tavern was now glued directly on him and the spectacle he'd become. The wrong spectacle. He'd need something grand to walk out of this place with his dignity intact. I'm no killer. His words were barely audible, even to him. You want something of note, old man? Then you'll have it. Mark it, before the season's out, Sharazin will see the boldest theft in its history. You'll all know its architect. He bared his teeth. The eyes of this city will be blind, but the eyes of Nerys will be on her favorite son. Kate scoffed, but Larash said nothing, and only glared at Draven. Oh, and Kate, you misplaced this. Draven launched the gem-encrusted dagger at his rival. Kate attempted to catch it, but missed, and it sank into the beam he leaned against. Draven swept out of the tavern, wondering how in the hells he would steal the jeweled eyes of the goddess of luck and death from her temple without bringing the entire city down on his head. Chapter 2. Freedom. Fresh tapers burned in brass candlesticks on the worn oak table. Sigurus focused his hate-filled gaze on them, rather than looking into the eyes of Calder, his current owner, and head artificer to one of the lesser priest-kings. Owner. The word disgusted him. Guards held Sigurus's arms, the chains jingling. Corded muscles tensed under dusky skin, ready for any chance to strike.
How many times, Sigurus, how many times must we repeat this before you're broken?
Calder's spidery hand scratched something in a ledger while appraising his property. Sigurus glared hatred back, shaking his head like an angry lion. Perspiration flew from his dark curls. The only thing Calder did better than inventing new weapons for his master was devising new tortures for his unfortunate slaves.
11, in case you haven't kept count. I have. And this time you've killed one of my servants.
His quick eyes seemed to regard Sigurus as a failed investment. Which I am.
I see you are still proud. Don't think you're the first mech twin scum I've broken. You are a single grain of sand in an endless desert. You will pay the price for your mad king ancestor. Kyrus tilted the world into chaos, and his mad blood flows in your veins.
Calder waved to his men and rose, closing the tome.
Bind him to the ring.
Sigurus's chains were connected to a stout iron ring mounted to one of the ceiling beams. The metal was pitted from years of use. Sigurus knew it well. I swear this will be the last time the lash tastes my back. He'd spoken the oath 100 times before, and he believed it now as fervently as he did the first time. Your chains may bind my flesh, but you will never master me, Calder. The mech twin will rise. Sigurus spat on the floor and got a punch to the ribs for his trouble. Calder produced the lash and ran the handle along Sigurus's back, while the guards withdrew to the corners of the room. The slave heard the rip of fabric as his shirt was torn. His owner was strong for such a willowy man, but Sigurus wondered what it would take to snap that slender neck.
No, I'm afraid this won't do. You have scars back here. I just don't think the barbs are getting through to you as they once did.
Calder turned the chained slave and brought the lash down across his midsection. Sigurus exhaled, but gave no other sign someone had struck him. Years of beatings provided him with a high threshold for pain. He flexed his arms, testing the chains, but no matter how he strained, they held. His efforts earned him a chuckle from the slave owner. Damn your eyes! Sigurus thrashed, willing every iota of hate into his master.
Oh, Sigurus, will you never learn? Your shackles are designed for that. No, I think the lash needs a break. Let's try something new.
What additional torment awaits me this time? The pens were rife with tales of the cruelties Calder visited on his slaves. Sigurus had endured so many lashings, he scarcely felt the lash any longer. His wrists ached from the cuffs digging into the scar tissue every time he strained against the bonds. Sigurus opened his eyes once more, looking for any opening he could exploit. Gudrun, my God, give me the strength to shatter these bonds and carve out the heart of this contemptuous bastard. Calder walked out of his field of vision. The guards stared at him with undisguised horror. Oh, pity? That's a first. Burning pain stabbed between his shoulder blades, and this time he screamed. Beyond the pain, he heard the sizzle of his flesh. The scent of his own burning flesh turned his stomach. The brand, or whatever it was, dug around, burrowing beneath his flesh, and Sigurus imagined it would burst from his chest. White light blurred his vision, and a new sensation blossomed within him. Fire. White and hot. He writhed, hearing Calder call for another iron. He had lost all concept of time. Even when Calder removed the brands, the fire inside him continued to grow until he imagined it would consume his whole body.
Release him.
Calder's barked command resonated in Sigurus's ears. Thank Gedrin. The two guards rushed to comply. When they released one of his manacles to pass the chain through the ring, he crumpled to the floor. His muscles twitched in response to the fresh burns on his back. They tried to lift his arm to reconnect the cuff, but Sigurus's hand remained trapped underneath him.
Hurry with that, get him off the floor.
The clank of a branding iron punctuated Calder's words as it dropped against the metal of the brazier. My last chance. He tensed his muscles, resisting the fumbling hands that tried to get to his freed arm. His sweat-slick skin hampered the guard's efforts. As one knelt, Sigurus exploded into motion, shoving him back to topple over a table. The other guard struck him hard across the jaw, but Sigurus gave it little heed. He rose and drove his forearm into the man's face in one fluid motion. The guard reeled out of his view.
Damn you! I'll kill you this time, I swear!
Calder ripped the iron out of the brazier and swung it at Sigurus, who blocked the blow with the length of chain dangling from his wrist. Sigurus snarled in response, kicking his owner in the stomach. Calder leapt out of the reach of the swinging chain before the empty cuff could connect with his chin. The two guards, who had regrouped, rushed forward. Sigurus's anger overwhelmed his pain, and he hefted a wooden bench to cast it at the oncoming men. One man went down under the weight of it. The other drew a short, stabbing sword and edged forward. Sigurus sidestepped a slash and sent him sprawling with a meaty fist to the side of his head, following it up with a kick to the midsection. The man's sword skittered away. Fire bloomed in his back again. He whirled, catching the iron rod halfway up the haft and ripping it out of the slave owner's hand. Calder crumpled when Sigurus backhanded him. The guard behind him was crawling on his knees to retrieve his sword. Sigurus swiveled and brought the long piece of iron down on the back of his head. Blood flew up, painting the ceiling with an arc of tiny droplets. The other guard, who was just now coming around, received the same fate.
Please, stop! Guards will come and kill you if you don't stop now!
Spittle flew from Calder's mouth, and tears mingled with blood coursed down his face, coloring his gray beard. Sigurus, regarding his former master, reveled in his long-denied victory. For years, as he languished in cells or labored in quarries, he had dreamt of this day. Would the bastard honor a deal if I made one for my freedom? No. He would cut me down like a rabid dog the moment I released him. Sigurus kicked Calder to the ground, relishing the entreaties from his master. With calm efficiency, he looped the chain around Calder's throat and pulled with strength born from decades of labor. The burns on his body rebelled, attempting to steal that power and sending echoes of agony up his spine. But he gritted his teeth and pulled harder. Time spiraled into eternity, until he thought he'd been pulling his entire life. He allowed Calder's limp body to fall back to the floor with a wet thud and hurried to the door, slamming the bolts a moment before someone crashed into it from the other side, shouting for Calder to answer.
He can no longer hear you, but I'll be happy to greet you once I find a proper weapon.
Sigurus hefted a dead guard's short sword. Not a proper desert sword, but it will do. He had no illusions. Exhausted by torture, he didn't stand a chance. This room had but one exit. He might not make his escape, but he'd at least die a free man. He found the key on Calder's belt, and shortly the other manacle fell from his scarred wrist. The chain he had looped around his wrist provided a poor shield, but it might allow him to fend off a slash without losing a hand.
Fight for me or die a slave.
The voice boomed in his mind, and he involuntarily fell to one knee.
Whoever you are, I'll fight any battle you choose, so long as you don't chain me. I will never be a slave again.
Weight crashed against the door, and the wood cracked. Sigurus braced himself. The air shimmered fire, and a grim-faced titan appeared from nowhere. Even in the center of the room, his golden helm touched the ceiling. A long beard fell past a face as craggy as the mountains. Gedrin extended a hand to Sigurus.
The god of conquest has heard your prayer. Take my hand and fight for your destiny.
Chapter 3. The Arena. Reality shimmered back into view. Sigurus stumbled, but didn't go down. He stood in an ancient coliseum of crumbling stone along with dozens of others, bristling with weapons, who all looked as confused as he felt. Sigurus tightened the grip on his purloined short sword, readying himself for anything, but not a single person moved. He tried to step forward, and instantly understood why. Some invisible force was holding him in place. The same must be true for the other warriors arrayed around the sandy pit. He flexed his arms, surprised to feel no tightness in his back from the wounds inflicted by Grand Artificer Calder. He checked with his free hand, and found only smooth, unblemished skin under his touch. Blessings of the god. So we're all to fight to the death for Gedren's amusement? The air at the center of the great pit shimmered, and before their eyes appeared a raised dais of basalt crowned by a throne of gold and brass. Gedren, the god of conquest, sat unmoving on his lofty, jewel-encrusted perch. He held something in his hand that glittered, even in the dim light of the arena. The prize? Whatever it ended up being, Sigurus didn't care. He possessed the only reward he had ever sought, his freedom. Anything more would just be icing on a festival cake. Not that he'd ever tasted one, just seen them from afar.
Warriors, hear me. You have been assembled by divine purpose to determine which of you is worthy to lead my armies against the remainder of the 12, who sit idly by while suffering is visited upon the world.
Gedren rose, growing in stature till he barely fit on the dais.
In my hand I hold the Fist of Heaven, a relic invested with my power to help you conquer the world in my name.
Murmurs sprang up around the arena as the same question arose from many mouths. What must we do? How can we prove our mettle? Who shall we kill? Gedren silenced them with a wave of his hand.
Only one may claim this gauntlet and become my champion. Only one may lead my armies to victory and hold reign over the world. How that person is selected is up to you.
He followed this ominous statement with a guttural laugh that made even Sigurus's knees go weak. Then the invisible force holding him went slack, and Sigurus found he could move once more. He looked to the other contestants, who had also tasted their freedom. Sigurus tested the weight of his blade, swinging it in the air. The chain he kept looped around his arm with the manacles dangling. He smiled a grim smile. He knew he'd be the only one to leave this pit alive. It took mere moments for chaos to erupt. Some ran for the raised dais, only to be rebuffed by that same invisible force. Evidently, Gedren had no plans to allow his gift to be obtained by speed or guile. The rest attacked each other. More than a dozen must have fallen in the first moments of the battle. Sigurus nodded. This was as it should be. He twisted just in time to fend off the blow of a heavy longsword. The edge of the other blade skittered to his crossguard, and caught there. He pivoted and drove a series of blows into his opponent's midsection until he heard bones crack. All the breath went out of his opponent, who sank to his knees. Sigurus drove his sword into the man's neck. A splash of blood sprayed Sigurus's face, and he licked his lips, relishing the taste. He imagined every warrior in the arena as one of his hated oppressors. He ducked an overhead slash, and drove his short sword up to the crossguard into the chest of another man dressed in long, flowing white robes. When the man fell to the ground, Sigurus scooped up the long, curved sword from the man's slack fingers. Now that was a blade fit for a mech-twin desert fighter. Sigurus smiled, slicing into his thumb with its fine edge and painting whorls of blood on his face as his ancestors did before a battle, back when the mech-twin were still free. Then he ran forward, lashing out at a wild-eyed harpy of a woman with a chain hanging from his other hand, cleaving her with his newfound blade when she dodged, severing her torso. He sprinted to his next victim before her body even hit the ground. Next, he came upon a soldier in the livery of a Valerian priest-king, dispatching his opponent with quick, efficient blows that spoke of military training. Sigurus raised his sword to end the man's life before they could even turn, but something in that man's posture gave him pause. The soldier turned his head, raising his longsword to target Sigurus, and then his mouth formed an oval of surprise. Sigurus nearly dropped his own sword in response. "Ethan, can it be you?" Sigurus raised his blade across his body just in case the man failed to recognize him in return. "Oh, Sigurus, you old dog!
Never thought I'd see a familiar face in this gore-splattered blood pit.
Ethan spun and disemboweled a man who surged at them, trying to take advantage of their seeming inattention. Sigurus took Ethan's measure. Ethan was older and grayer, but he was still the man who'd taught Sigurus to use weapons, though it had been against the law for a mech twin to even hold a weapon. Ethan had been one of the few lighter-skinned men who had ever shown him a measure of decency, and Sigurus would likely already be dead on this sand if not for the lessons Ethan had shared with him during the long nights they'd spent sparring together while the others slept.
I'm not game to cross my blade with you, old friend. What say you, should we work together to gut the rest of this rabble?
Ethan gave him a wink as he shook the blood from his longsword.
And the prize?
Sigurus asked, ever wary of betrayal.
It should be worn by a king. If I remember, you often claimed to be of royal blood. I refuse to be a captain of the priest kings anymore, but I'd serve such a king as yourself. Mayhap you can revive your lost kingdom with Gedrun's trinket.
He held his blade up in a gesture Sigurus took as a salute. Sigurus flourished his blade in the same manner, dreams of an empire dancing before his eyes. He would keep an eye on this one, but if Ethan was genuine, it wouldn't hurt to have someone watching his back. And if not, Ethan would die like every other light skin beneath his curved blade. They set out across the field, working in tandem with deadly effect. Months of sparring together in the wee hours of the night allowed them to mesh into an effective unit. Ethan flanked his left side, protecting Sigurus from all attacks on that side, and allowing him to focus on driving forward like a berserk titan. His blade rose and fell with uncanny speed and certainty till Sigurus was sure the god of conquest was guiding his every movement. Another deft cut, and a wild-haired woman bearing twin daggers sank to the ground with a cleft skull. Do they all feel the god moving within them, or is it just me? Ethan blocked an overhead strike with a shield he'd taken from a dead combatant and lunged forward, impaling a man and kicking him away with brutal efficiency. Against all odds, they not only seemed to be winning, but also attracting followers. One man, Bastus, who labored alongside Sigurus once in a quarry, fell in on Sigurus's other side with nary a word. Bastus bore a broadaxe, and though he lacked Ethan's skill, his sheer strength and brutality made up for it. Soon, 2 became 6, and they cut through the opposing contestants like a scythe through ripe wheat. It made him wonder if he really was destined to lead. They deferred to him, shadowed his movements, and killed as if mirroring him, and Sigurus thought there might be some divine force balancing the odds in his favor. He shook such thoughts from his head. There would be time enough to think on these things later, once he'd claimed Gedrun's favor. A blade met his in a violent collision, sending a shockwave down his arm. The wielder was a brawny man clad only in animal skins, who towered over him. Sigurus snarled, lashing out with his free hand into the barbarian's midsection, dropping him to one knee. Then he grabbed the barbarian by the throat and squeezed until the man's eyes bugged out of his head. A lusty smile creased his lips as the barbarian's neck snapped. On and on his team worked, till only a score stood between them and the end of this interminable struggle. He bled from a dozen wounds, including a long, angry wheal of red that ran diagonally down his chest to his hip. His motley crew of 4 remaining followers all bore similar injuries, but for the most part they were whole. Only 2 had fallen, and they had died well. Sigurus gave his remaining compatriots a wolfish grin. The god's purpose is our purpose. We are all free brothers. Drink deep of their blood so we may claim our destiny. He uttered a guttural war cry as he imagined his mech twin ancestors must have done, and surged forward. Ethan and the rest followed without hesitation. Sigurus's last opponent was a small, swarthy, rat-faced man bearing a rust-pitted longsword and wearing an oilskin cloak. The whisper of a beard decorated his pock-scarred face. He wielded his blade like a bolt of lightning, and it left a bleeding gash on Sigurus's cheek. Sigurus parried with all the speed he could muster after what must have been hours in this blood-spattered arena. On and on they went, trading blows and parrying swings. Sigurus received another wound, this time to his leg, which hampered his movement, but still he drove onward, casting a net of steel with his curved sword. Fortune smiled on him. The rusty longsword snapped during one of their exchanges, and Sigurus's heavier sword dug deep into the man's side. A quick rabbit punch to his opponent's throat left him gasping for breath. Like a fish out of water, the man flopped about on the sand, dying at Sigurus's feet. Sigurus smiled and stepped over his body to cut down the man Ethan grappled. With the last man dead, Sigurus stood side by side with Bastus and Ethan, facing their god.
Only one may approach.
The god extended his hand, proffering the golden gauntlet. Sigurus regarded his comrades. Ethan shrugged his shoulders in response. Bastus went to one knee, showing he had no interest in the prize. Sigurus strode forward, wind whipping at his sweat-drenched hair. Liquid dripped from his face, and he couldn't tell if it was perspiration or blood. The god of conquest looked down on him, and a thin, tight smile turned up the corners of Gedren's mouth.
You are the one.
I am the one. Sigurus raised his hand, fingers outstretched. He knew his heritage as a direct descendant of the great king Kyrus, emperor of the Mectwin, and now he would make his dream a reality. His people would be free once more, and they would raise him up as their king. No, as their emperor. Gedren did not move, but a glittering gauntlet of shining brass rose and floated through the air to settle on Sigurus's outstretched hand. A slight ripple of power echoed through the now silent amphitheater. He curled his hand into a fist, reveling in the thrum of energy.
Go forth in my name and claim your kingdom, warlord.
Sigurus nodded. It begins. Chapter 4. The Eyes of Nerys. Guttering torches illuminated ornate stone walls, decorated with tapestries and friezes depicting the goddess of luck and death. Light spilled out in wavering circles against the darkness cloaking the room. Polished pews of smooth, planed dark wood stood empty of supplicants. A blue velvet banner on either side of the burled wood lay unfurled, depicting interlocking circles. There was only one thing out of place, and that was Draven, climbing the statue of Nerys. One arm of the deity rose to the heavens. The other bore a silver cuff. Even in the gloom, the cuff reflected glints of brilliance. At her throat glittered a ruby brooch, shining like an angry star. Pinned at her girdle, a gold shield larger than a man's hand represented the protection she offered. At the base of the statue stood a plaque with the standard curse for anyone who stole from the goddess of luck and death. The hands of men will turn against the thief. The mind of the thief will warp. The heart of the thief will shrivel. The flesh will slough from his bones. Bugger that. What does a goddess need with jewels? Draven's attention was arrested by the eyes, twin gemstones of different hues. A radiant sapphire gleamed with the calm serenity of the sea, beside an emerald as green as the fertile plains to the east. Their facets caught even the smallest flicker from the torches. The eyes of Nerys. Draven gazed up in wonder, his mouth going dry while his palms perspired. He was finally here, in the temple, undiscovered. Draven was about to pirate the treasures of the goddess herself. With just one theft, the guild would never question him again. Despite his anxiety, he remained still. His mind free of all fear, Draven dried his palms. Everyone will know the name of Draven, Master Thief. And that's where we're going to leave this one, on that nice little cliffhanger. Thank you so much for listening to an excerpt from Heartmaster by Nicholas Everhart. It's an epic fantasy, and here is a quick description of the book so you can decide whether you would like to read the whole thing. When Draven steals Heartmaster, the enchanted bracelet, imbued with the spirit of a valorous knight, binds itself to the brash thief. Unable to remove it, Draven will have to face the repercussions of his poor decisions, and quickly, because war between the gods is brewing, and whether Draven likes it or not, he cannot evade his destiny this time. You can find a link for where to purchase Heartmaster in the description. Thank you so much for listening with me. Have a good night, and I'll see you in the next one.